my name is ShawNshawN. I sell art on ShawNshawN.co and screen reading on ShawNshawNacting.com. Today we're going to review The Eyes of Tammy Faye.
What'd you do?
So this is directed by Michael Showalter. Time is 2 hours, 6 minutes. I usually like an hour and a half. It's a biography, so it takes a little bit longer. You have Jessica Chastain plays Tammy Faye Bakker. She's always a great actress. Andrew Garfiled plays Jim Bakker, her husband. Cherry Jones plays Rachel Grover. Vincent D'Onofrio plays Jerry Falwell. Mark Wystrach plays Gary Paxton. So basically it's a story of Tammy Faye and Jim Bakker from the eyes of Tammy Faye from her perspective. She grows up as a little girl. She's shamed for being, her mom is divorced, and so she's considered the ill seed for this small church, right? So she grows up with this perverted views of deep religion, but then not accepted by the church. And she really longs to be connected with the church. She falls in love with this guy who's this up-and-coming preacher. He wanted to be a TV jockey, but he actually ran someone over, so he feels guilty and turns towards God. So he has this great connection with, becoming a preacher to kind of save his soul for running over this kid, right? Which is a great, backstory for Jim Bakker that I didn't know about at all. I don't know how true it is, but it's a really great story. And then it's kind of how they rise. There's massive empire on TV in the 80s, and then their huge collapse, when all the scandals kind of break loose. And so it has a really great, poor to riches and then back to poor again story. It was interesting because I remember watching this as a kid. This TV show, I didn't watch it from a religious perspective. I watched it to see how much money they could scam out of people. I love watching these old religious shows and see them you can see all the, it was like a bingo session, ding, 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 ding. And all these calls coming on, and people would call in. You were like, who are these idiots calling? And donating all their money. I mean, I know one show I remember in particular. I don't know which show it was. Maybe it was the Bakkers, maybe it was someone else. But they called in and were like, we need our studio line. Praise Jesus. It's only $12,000. Can you call in and fix it today? I'm like, they're running a TV show. They can't afford their own lights. It was just hilarious. So it really brought me back a lot of funny memories about these really tacky evangelists. And now you still have one, Joel Osteen, the 700 Club still around. But I think Joel Osteen's kind of taken over the reins from them as far as kind of a positive church spin. It was great to see, how Tammy had to overcome her shameful background. And then she combined gospel singing into the church. And they started with the Muppet Show and then the 700 Club. And they slowly got their own TV show. Once they got enough celebrity, they kind of launched their own network, and they were even more successful than the Christian network that they started from. So that was kind of interesting. And obviously they got even more popular than these other TV evangelists because they had a much more of a positive spin, especially when the AIDS came out, and they kind of had a positive spin on that. So that was a really cool thing I didn't know about the Bakkers. Maybe I did at the time, but I forgot. But that was kind of cool because a lot of these Christian groups will kind of preach like hate towards gays or hate towards, the minority groups. And so it's really great to see, they had a positive message, so to say. Yeah, now, with Joel Osteen, definitely he's taking up the reins. He has like a stadium full, and, he was a little bit exposed with scandal as well, as far as they saw his massive house. It's like $13 million house, and I think it was when Katrina broke out, he wouldn't house the poor in his stadium, and then finally he was forced to after a week or so. So that was really interesting. You just see the greed of these people where they're like, no, I need the money to save the poor on TV. It's just like the ultimate scam, and it's just allowed. They don't even pay taxes, And it's interesting, you kind of, when you see these TV shows, you can kind of see the good they were trying to do at the same time, but then you see they're making all these public works, like kind of charity donations, but at the same time, they're raking in tons of money for themselves. So you're like, where does the good and the scam start? It's kind of like this, really blurry line when it comes to church, especially with TV evangelists, I would say. And it was just interesting to see kind of the good and the bad they did at the same time. They were obviously making a lot of money for themselves, but at the same time, they're kind of helping the poor and different projects, but then they're making like a Disneyland, Christian Disneyland, and everything was just wild. It's really funny too. You see a little bit how Tammy kind of transitions from normal makeup to really extreme makeup. And I think it kind of reflects kind of the scandals behind the scene of Jim Bakker cheating on her cheating on Jim, and kind of they're feeling guilty and pretending to be a married couple at the same time. And it's interesting at the very end of the film to kind of see how far, the whole empire of the Tammy and Jim kind of falls apart at the seams from all their corruption and sex scandals. They just were they were borrowing against all their donations, and so they really didn't have enough money to keep the church going, and so they owed a lot of money to people. And this is actually very typical of any growing business that grows really fast. You're always kind of, you're here, and then you're going to be here, so you have to spend like this amount, but it's way more than yours. So you're constantly in debt, but you keep rising up the ranks until you kind of fall off that cliff. You're just kind of keep stacking, right? And so that's very common in a growing business. You can see this also in the story of Nike. I read the book on Nike, and it was very similar. They were always stretched on debt all the way up to the top, and then at some point they kind of had enough money, and they were kind of self-funding. But at a certain point, they're just kind of very stretched thin on the credit lines and all that stuff. And you can see this with Tammy and Jim's, really fast rise, meteoric rise, and they kind of were borrowing credit the whole way. So it wasn't unusual at the top they would have kind of fall prey to the creditors. It's also interesting if you compare this to, say, superstar musicians. They're totally corrupt as well, and they do all kind of sex scandals and do all kind of crazy drugs. But the public doesn't go after them like they do these TV evangelists. But I guess it's because the TV evangelists, they're always saying like, I have a connection to Jesus. And so it's all the hypocrisy that comes out, like similar to how Tiger Woods, he pretended to be this all pristine golfer, and then he was like screwing like 16 different blonde girls on his side and destroyed his marriage. So it's just the hypocrisy is really what brings him down. And people don't have any connection with these people. They just feel like they're hypocrites and everything. Yeah, and it was just impressive. I didn't know about that hidden story about Tammy Faye sticking up for gays in the middle of the AIDS epidemic. When I was growing up, that was a huge, huge thing. And it was very taboo back in the day to talk about gays at all. I remember, we were in high school, we were very naive, and we were debating whether, say, Culture Club was gay or not, Boy George was gay or not. Like, he's the most gayest guy on TV ever for TV music, right? I mean, Boy George, George Michael, maybe you missed that, like, if you're just kind of naive, but to miss Boy George, I mean, it was so obvious he was gay, right? And we're like, did he dress that way? Is he just pretending to be gay? I mean, that's how dumb we were as kids, right? But it also shows just the lack of education on, like, nowadays they're kind of reversing that a little bit with proactive teaching, but then it's kind of like, how far do you go down the chain? And they're kind of going really into preschool and stuff, and you're like, or kindergarten or first grade and third grade, and you're like, maybe it's a little too early to talk about sex. I don't know. So they got to kind of balance that too between conservative, really, you're straight and that's all there is, and then teaching little tiny kids like, oh, this guy changed his sex and everything. You're like, do you want to have that at a certain age? I mean, what age do you introduce that? It's really a good topic to kind of see where the balance should probably be. And yeah, I think we're, as a society kind of still discovering that between conservative areas of the country and very open-minded parts of the country. It's kind of like it's a very different discussion that's kind of going on. And it's interesting that Tammy Faye kicked it off way back in the 80s, and I didn't even know about it. Or maybe I forgot, maybe, who knows, but I thought it was an interesting angle on the film. Overall, it's a pretty good film. You can see how the fame and money just corrupts anyone, no matter what. And it kind of, they always say money always heightens who you really are. And with Tammy, it's like the exaggerated makeup and the exaggerated, furs and the clothing and outlandish clothing. For her husband, I think it was just outlandish projects. He want to build a massive Christian empire. So it's really interesting to see kind of how money you always see it with like superstar musicians as well, or superstar actors. They get off the deep end. You're like, what are they thinking? But it's just, you give someone a lot of money that just exaggerates their personality. So you can see some people are able to balance this really well, and they kind of have a stable, normal lifestyle. Like, say, The Rock, I think he has a pretty clean image, or Kevin Hart kind of has a clean image. But you have other people, they just go off the deep end, And it's always funny. People love to see all the dirt on the gossip on celebrities and rich people. So it's just kind of funny how the public just eats it up and kind of, they have this, they're actually jealous of the wealth and everything. So instead of admitting it to themselves, they just go and attack, these rich people. So I just love the hypocrisy of people, just like all these poor people, like, well, they got ahead. It was illegal. They stole the money or something. They want to see the corruptions just so they can justify, like, well, I played it straight and narrow, so that's why I'm poor. And they're rich because they stole it all or something, It's always like the tax the rich kind of thing that's coming out now. It's like, yeah, you tax the rich, you won't have any job, dumbass. But people fall for this. They just have no idea how the economy works. But anyway, I recommend it. It's a really good film. I don't think you'd see it more than once. But still really, really good film. Really good, solid film. If you like to subscribe, you can subscribe below. And I'll see you in the next movie review.